All right, everybody, and welcome to Fic Night for May 2019, hosted by myself, Title Dragon, at hpfanfictalk.com, aka HPFT. Each Fic Night, we feature at least one story written by one of our members that we do a live reading of, and typically we're fortunate enough to have that author with us to answer Q&A that's either put in beforehand by some of our members. We've got some folks who drop in on the live chat. And then if we can't make it through with just those, I've got my own questions to drop into the mix and generally run about half hour to an hour talking over the story and chatting with the author. This year, or excuse me, this month, our featured story is A Letters Like Immortality by MadiMalfoy. Maddie is something of a Fic Night legend at this point. This is her third month being featured since we have been running Fic Night since the site started. But what we're going to do now is just go ahead and jump into the story. Please do not mind my room. I'm in the process of moving. Quidditch had been Adrian's favorite pastime since he was 3 years old. His parents had bought him the newest children's broom on the market for his third birthday, and he spent the rest of that evening zooming around their sitting room with glee. They doted on their only child, encouraging his interest in Quidditch as he grew in both age and size. Richard Pusey was a tall, broad man who worked with Gringotts Bank through his consulting firm and had once been a part of Slytherin's Quidditch team as a beater for his 5th and 6th years at Hogwarts. It was clear that as soon as Adrian entered Hogwarts and came home for the first winter holidays with pants several inches shorter than his shoes, that he was going to be just as large and skilled as his father. When tryouts were held during his first year, Adrian flew his hardest, did as much as he could to show the team captain that it would be worth it to take him on as a first year. The talent and ease Adrian had on a broom did not escape Captain Lucas Blackwood, and he was hesitant at first, but couldn't resist having a truly natural flyer on the team. Adrian wrote his parents as soon as Lucas posted the roster in the common room, disbelief behind every word. He was only a reserve player, but he took it with pride that he was still on the team as a first year. Adrian worked the hardest and longest out of anyone else on the team besides Lucas, who knew that most of the other members were on the team due to their parents' desire for them, rather than an actual love of playing Quidditch. So the two boys bonded as chasers and friends. While everyone else was off doing other frivolous activities, they'd be going over new routes and plays to try and practice later that week to improve their record. When Lucas left after Adrian's third year to be replaced as captain by Marcus Flint, Adrian knew it wouldn't be the same team anymore. The new brooms from Draco's father the previous year had been nice, but Draco hardly cared about practicing with the team, saying he'd had professional practice over the summer holidays, so he didn't need to come to practice with the team every week. To top it off, one of their new recruits to the team as beater was a scrawny little first year named Adrian Tennant. Flint then made the fantastic decision to refer to them by their last names, but Pusey eventually got shortened to Poos, and was therefore used quite often as rude jabs toward Adrian on and off the Quidditch pitch, well after the season ended. He didn't let the name-calling get to him, though, and when Flint's successor, Montague, graduated, Adrian stepped up to the plate, and, as he was the only returning member worth a damn, Professor Snape made him team captain. The year prior had been the Triwizard Tournament, and Adrian had nearly blown a fuse when Professor Snape had told him that Quidditch was canceled that year due to the requisition of the pitch for the tournament. In retrospect, he'd actually quite appreciated the break from both large exams and Quidditch matches during his 6th year. But now, as his last year at Hogwarts began, he finally had his chance to make Slytherin's Quidditch team better than ever, and he wasn't going to waste it. He held tryouts for all positions on the team, knowing he could potentially end up with 6 new teammates and have to truly build the team up. But he didn't care about that. The Quidditch Cup had gone to Gryffindor the last 3 years it had been held now, and all three of the other houses were itching to reclaim that title. Adrian whipped his team right into shape at the beginning of term, holding practices 3 nights a week and on Sundays. When the season began, he led them to their first opening match victory in 2 years, and a huge party in the common room was held later that evening. There were little cakes and pastries strewn about one of the tables, with people dancing all around. Elation filled him as he got the recognition for getting the team ready and for leading them to victory. One of his fellow seventh-year girls even pecked him on the cheek with a "job well done" and a wink as she walked away, leaving him confused and very pink in the cheeks. Several weeks later at breakfast, Adrian was eating his usual toast and jam when the post came in and, oddly, dropped a letter square onto his other piece of toast, getting jam all over the envelope. He frowned, unsure of who this letter would be from, as he'd just received his mom's weekly letter the day before, nor was he expecting to hear from any professional Quidditch recruiters until at least after the winter holidays. Shrugging, he slid a finger under the seal and pulled out the folded parchment. Dear Adrian, I know this is probably unexpected, but I just had to get it off my chest, what with the last Hogsmeade trip coming up soon before the Christmas holidays and all. You've been doing such a great job on the Quidditch pitch this season, and when you took that bludger to the chest during the match against Hufflepuff and continued playing, that was just amazing. So I guess this is my way of saying that I've got a crush on you, and I'd like to spend some time with you during the next Hogsmeade weekend, if you're willing. I hope I've not mucked it all up, and if you don't feel the same way, please just tell me. My feelings won't be hurt, and we can move on past it and not do anything together during the visit to Hogsmeade. Lillian. Adrian didn't understand. He didn't get hit with a bludger during that match, did he? Oh no, it was Tennant that got hit. Bollocks, he thought. What the hell was he supposed to do with this? Clearly it wasn't meant for him, but he also didn't know who Lillian was either. It wasn't one of the Slytherin's 6th or 7th years, he knew that much for sure. He was at a loss of what to do. Did he reseal the letter and give it to Tennant? Did he try to find out who Lillian was and return the letter to her? He stuffed the letter back into the envelope and tucked it away into his robes, choosing to deal with it later. Daisy sat down from him at the Slytherin table just then and struck up a conversation about a new route he wanted to try at practice later that day, rescuing him from thinking about it any longer. They finished their breakfast still talking Quidditch and parted ways as Adrian headed to the library to do some studying, and Vasey returned to the common room, one of the few able to actually study there without being distracted all of the time. As Adrian climbed the stairs on the way to the library, he met Tennant in the corridor and had to prevent himself from saying anything about the letter he'd received. See you on the pitch in 6 hours, Tennant. I hope you've been practicing your maneuvers, Adrian said, giving a one-finger salute as they passed. Tennant rolled his eyes and replied, Sure have, boss. Adrian nodded and continued to the library, feeling his heartbeat increase, knowing he had the letter intended for Tennant burning a hole in his pocket. He went to his usual table in the depths of the library near the biographical section and pulled out his charms homework. Professor Flitwick had assigned each of them a different complex charm to research and write 24 inches of parchment on the charm and the history behind it, as it was Newt-level charms, and he wanted them to learn more besides just the incantations of charms. The book Adrian was referencing was one of Professor Flitwick's own personal books, so Adrian was handling it carefully. He was researching a particularly difficult charm that would animate inanimate objects. His essay was mostly done, but he wanted to rework a section after finding an interesting detail about these types of charms in Flitwick's book. Taking out a new sheet of parchment, he began the arduous task of rewriting his essay with his notes and an old draft for reference. Adrian didn't usually have to do rewrites, but he wanted to turn in an excellent essay since Flitwick had lent him one of his personal books and felt obligated because of that loan. Approaching footsteps broke Adrian's concentration. nearly causing a catastrophe with his inkwell and his parchment. He glanced up to see a vaguely familiar seventh-year Ravenclaw girl heading straight for him, determination and hope on her face. He cleared his throat as she stopped in front of his table, clearly on a mission. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I believe you can," she replied, taking that as an invitation to set her things down and join him at the table. Adrian cleared some of his papers off to the side to give her room for her books, ever the proper gentleman. "Unfortunately, I can't quite remember your name, and I just as well look stupid now rather than 10 minutes into talking to you without ever once saying your name," he admitted. She gave him a small smile and took out her own set of quill ink. "My name's Lillian. We don't really have any classes together besides Transfiguration and Charms, and I don't play Quidditch, so no harm done." His stomach dropped, and he felt heat rising to his cheeks. "Ah, good. I didn't want to offend you." Why was he speaking so formally to her? Surely she didn't know he'd received her letter instead of Tennant. "Well, then it's all settled," she smiled. "I saw that Flitwick assigned us both similar charms, so I was actually just hoping to see how you were coming along with your research, as I've seemed to hit a bit of a wall with mine." The relief at her purpose being one of pure academics and not for matters of the heart nearly overwhelmed Adrian. He shuffled some of his papers until he found the book Flitwick had given him and handed it over to her, explaining the crux of what he'd found in the book and its use for him in his essay. They spent the next 2 hours debating back and forth about their charms and their uses and historical contexts. Simultaneous stomach rumblings caused them both to check the time and realize it was nearly the end of dinner. They gathered all of their things up and chatted all the way to the Great Hall before parting ways to go to their respective house tables. When Adrian sat down at the Slytherin table, he was accosted by none other than Adrian Tennant. "Bloody hell, Tennant, can't you let a bloke sit down before you attack him?" Adrian said. Tennant ignored that jab and asked, "Why were you walking into the Great Hall with Lillian Turner?" Adrian gave him a pointed look and snarked back. "What's it to you who I enter and exit the Great Hall with, Tennant? Got a crush or something?" He shut up after that and returned to his own dinner meal. Adrian scoffed in his general direction and selected his meal from the many available dishes in front of him. As he glanced around the great hall while eating, his eyes landed on Lillian, who quickly dropped her gaze to her plate when he caught her looking at him. Adrian shot her a smirk when she raised her vision again, teasing her. She rolled her eyes and turned to her fellow Ravenclaws next to her, striking up a conversation about something Adrian was sure he would have no knowledge of. Ravenclaws had some of the most specific, weird knowledge out of all the different house members he knew. For some odd reason, though, he couldn't figure out how she knew where he studied in the library, nor why she'd approached him in the first place. After finishing his meal, he gathered up his fellow Quidditch teammates and led them down to the pitch for their scheduled evening practice. Tennant was definitely grumpier than usual, but was more than happy to show off his skill with the maneuvers they'd learned last week. Lying in his bed that night with the curtains drawn, Adrian fingered the letter, lost in thought. He knew that now he'd talked with Lillian, it would only serve to make things weirder to give Tennant his letter. Tennant would see Adrian's delivery of it as a joke or a service to Lillian. As a joke or a mean prank. He was well and truly stuck. Adrian sighed and shoved the letter into the drawer of his bedside table before turning over to sleep. 5 days later, Adrian handed in his essay to Professor Flitwick right after Lillian, who blushed when he looked at her when she turned to return to her seat. Wait, did she just blush? What in the hell for? Adrian thought, extremely confused. Everyone sat back down and Professor Flitwick began the lesson, promptly stopping any ideas Adrian had about Lillian, so he could focus on the new charm they were learning today. The letter was still burning a hole in his bedside table, and the longer he held on to it, the more he feared the repercussions of giving it to either Tennant or Lillian this late. He considered throwing it into the fire in his dormitory's hearth, but the possibility of it not burning fully in a semi-public fireplace rendered it a non-viable option. So it stayed in the drawer, tucked away under some other forgotten letters from his parents, weighing heavily on his conscience. Lillian found him once again in the library the following week, cramming for the quiz Professor McGonagall was having them do on the history behind several of the transfigurations they'd learned as first years, as newt preparations. He was usually better about studying, but the Quidditch match against Hufflepuff had been unexpectedly brutal. He'd spent all of Sunday recovering from the bruised ribs he'd gotten from a bludger, and an accidental crash into one of the Hufflepuff chasers. Nevertheless, his ribs were still tender, and the hard wooden backs of the library chairs weren't helping him out at all. The transfigurations were simple enough, but he'd forgotten most of the theory behind them back in second year, when he'd taken up Quidditch for Slytherin as a regular player. Adrian had even kept a part of his table clear for her, hoping against reason that she'd want to study with him again. He knew he was a Slytherin through and through, but his mother had been a hat stall between Slytherin and Ravenclaw, and he definitely felt he got more of his mother's academic inclinations, no matter his skill on the Quidditch pitch. Adrian also couldn't resist the temptation of unraveling a mystery, even one so simple as working out Lillian's apparent crush on Tennant. His goals were twofold then when she appeared: learn all of his terms again, and figure this Ravenclaw girl out without being obvious about it. His father's skills at wordplay would come in handy tonight, and Adrian could only hope he'd be good enough at it to extract the information he wanted. The Hogsmeade visit weekend was less than 2 weeks away, but Lillian seemed less than concerned about it. "Hey, Adrian, how are you doing?" Lillian asked politely, setting her things down. "I saw you got hit pretty hard on Saturday in the match." He smiled and said, "Well, I bruised most of my ribs, so I'm doing all right, thanks. How are you?" She dug her Transfiguration textbook out of her bag before replying, "I'm fine, just a bit flustered with all the things we've got due this week. It's madness." Adrian chuckled. "And that is why I'm not taking all of those classes you are, Lillian. I'm coasting by this week. I can figure out my plans for Hogsmeade instead." Lillian's eyes went wide at his mention of Hogsmeade, and she quietly responded, "Right, I forgot Hogsmeade was next weekend already." "Well, if you don't have any plans, I'd happily spend some time with you at Scrivenchafts. I'm trying to find the right quill and inkpot set for my mum for Christmas, and I think I need another woman's opinion so I don't get my mum something absolutely awful. I'm also not about to owl her asking what kind she wants, because she'd just send back something tricky and unhelpful, bless her," Adrian said, a twinkle in his eye as he glanced at Lillian. She blushed, tucking a piece of loose hair behind her ear. "I would like that a lot, Adrian, thank you." He shuffled a few papers around before meeting his eyes again. "You know, I was actually rather brash a couple weeks ago and asked someone to go to Hogsmeade with me, but I'm afraid they've given no response." Adrian's heart rate shot up as he feigned curiosity, even though he knew all about said letter. "Which is quite unfortunate, because they're rather easy on the eyes, too, if you know what I mean," she said, winking at him. Did she just wink at me? Bloody hell. Adrian cleared his throat to buy time for a response, but he still didn't have one. Blast it all, she was teasing him. Well, two could play at that game. "Oh, I do. A fair few of my fellow former Quidditch teammates that went professional for the Holyhead Harpies were definitely nice to look at, but only when they weren't hurling a ball at me at high speed." He laughed at that, her shoulders visibly relaxing. "I didn't realize how easy you'd be to talk to, considering you're all about Quidditch and winning for Slytherin. It's nice to know there's brains behind the brawn I see on the Quidditch pitch." Was she bloody flirting with me? What's she playing at? Trying to beat me at my own game? Adrian let out a chuckle at that and lifted his arms as if to say, "Well, you got me there." "So who is this mystery bloke you asked to Hogsmeade?" Adrian asked bluntly. Lillian shifted in her seat. Well, he's a Quidditch player. Not in my house, though. I can't stand them regularly. But when they win, they become positively insufferable. But, yeah, he didn't even say anything to me about getting the letter. So now I'm thinking he never got it in the first place, and it's all for the better. Are you going to make me guess every single non-Ravenclaw Quidditch player that's a bloke, or will you just tell me? Not going to lord it over you or anything. I'm just nosy, as a Slytherin is wont to be, Adrian said cheekily. Fair enough, but I think I'll just let you stew on it instead and take me to Hogsmeade yourself, like you said you would a few minutes ago, Lillian responded, a flush in her cheeks. Adrian put his hands together. It's settled, then. Lillian, would you care to accompany me to the Hogsmeade trip next week? And, as friends, she smiled widely. I'd be delighted to, Adrian. They studied in companionable silence for another hour before she rose to leave and turn in for the night. Before she left, she leaned in close to Adrian's face and said, For the record, you can go ahead and burn the letter. Lillian straightened up and sauntered away, throwing one glance back at Adrian sitting there, mouth open and dumbfounded, then turned out of his sight. He ran a hand through his hair, completely in disbelief at her out-slithering himself so well, and so completely he hadn't even seen it coming. Adrian looked after her, a smile slowly forming. Lillian Turner was a wily Ravenclaw, and Adrian Pusey was more than a match for that. All right, so that story was, again, A Letter is Like Immortality. It was written by one of our Ravenclaw members, MadiMalfoy. Maddie, are you still with us?
I am.
Excellent. So, like I said before, Maddie, this is her third time being featured here on Fic Night. So some of the stuff that I and other people might normally ask, I think, is we can't plumb those depths again about some of your general writing talents. But to jump into one of the easy kind of maybe silly even questions that I have about your story is at the very beginning you refer to the pair of Adrians on the Quidditch team, and the pronunciation struck me of his last name. Were they calling him Poos or Pooch?
They were calling it like
Okay.
vomit. Yeah.
Gotcha. I wanted to make sure, and I felt pretty sure that was how it was, but I actually had a friend and a guy that I worked with for quite some time whose last name was Puccini, and we called him Pooch. So I was like, oh man, are we going that direction? But I'm glad I was mistaken and that I got it right when I was reading the story, sort of. Uh, we have got some people in the chat, one of whom wants you to know that their cat, this is from Abby, likes me reading your stories, apparently, because they're all over the computer every time that happens. So congratulations, further congratulations on your writing in that regard as well, I guess.
Well, I've told you before, Kevin, you need to do audiobooks.
Well, I've got a lot going on, and I'm already pushing the envelope since I'm not supposed to be doing anything that might embarrass the dignity of my office at work. So we'll see. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll break free of the chains of courtroom and start reading audiobooks. But another question I had about the story, and this is one that's much more obvious, probably. Why Adrian?
So Adrian, so I wrote this for 2 challenges. The first challenge was for Find Frenzy's Slytherin centric challenge, and that was the character that was given to me. And then I also wrote this for Chris's and Jules's wrong letter or wrong owl challenge. So when I first got Agent Puce's, like, I don't even know what to do with this guy. But then I just kind of did some digging on the HP wiki to figure out, all right, what does this guy do in canon? And it was all about Quidditch. I'm like, all right, we're just gonna go to town on the Quidditch theme throughout this fic. And it's just a new new house for me to write and new characters for me to write.
Well, I guess the challenge worked out awesome in that way, and also in the quality of the story. Adrian was definitely balling out throughout the piece. What was there a connection that I slash we may be unaware of with him and Lillian, or is Lillian somebody you just said, you know what, I'm gonna make this wily Ravenclaw character. Let's go.
There is no connection. It's just a random made up character. It's not a exciting answer.
Fair enough.
Just made her up.
Well, that makes her even better, honestly. So congratulations again on coming up with excellent, unique characters that we've never read before. I will ask because I'm fairly clueless, as clueless as Adrian, perhaps, in this area of the world. So, was she pranking him in the letter, trying to make him think that it was the other Adrian, or was that an honest mistake because she's clueless about Quidditch?
I'm gonna leave that open to interpretation.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. There are so many interpretations. We do have a question from Abby. She said you include a lot of backstory within your stories in an engaging way. How do you decide what backstories to include?
So, a lot of times it's just because I don't know how to start a story. So then I just write some descriptive background information just as a way to get me going as far as plot. So it's not always intentional. I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. Sometimes it is relevant. Like if I have a multi-chapter fic, then it's usually more relevant to have it in the beginning because then it's exposition. But in one shots like this, it's mostly just because I needed to write something down to get it going, and that's really it.
Are these either of these characters things that are people that you may want to expand on their futures, not necessarily together or not, but as independent characters?
Oh, I am so bad at maintaining universes, so probably not. But I can always return to them later in the future. I have a lot of things to do this summer, though, for writing that I'm very behind on. So if I do come back to them, it probably won't be for a while.
Fair enough. I know about being behind. I'm behind on so many projects, and I'm supposed to finish a challenge entry in the next 2.5 hours. So it's going to be great. I'm sure I'll totally be able to finish it, and you will as well. Let's see if we've got any other characters in the chat. Mostly people loving your story. Oh, the question I had is escaping me right now. Oh, you had mentioned that you were writing a new house in the story, which I am taking to be Slytherin house. What was it like doing that?
So I guess that's kind of misleading because I have written Draco Malfoy before, but this was different. I'd say it's new because it's not something that's been the focus of the story for me, and I was just really trying to think of going past, the stereotypical Slytherin traits to write about and making sure that that Adrian seemed believable as a person and as a Slytherin, while still being my own take on him, I guess.
Well, I think I thought he was very well developed. I thought that played out very well, both his strengths and flaws. I probably have asked you this before, but obviously there are people out there who've not watched every Fic Night video. We've had a lot of new members, especially lately, joining this site. So what is your pro tip on writing descriptions that really get you there, but don't pound you over the head with prose?
So I'm actually notoriously bad for being very long-winded. It wasn't really until last fall when I was writing for NIM's narrative original fiction challenge that I really had to sit down and kind of work through descriptions. And I would say just to keep it to the point, it's all just a matter of making sure that what you're talking about is important to the storyline and moves the plot along, whether even though it is more of a descriptive um, prose that you're writing, it's you just have to like make sure that um, oh my god, I don't know that it fits and it flows with the mood and the tone that you're trying to set as you go through your story.
And as far as the balance of that and dialogue and then character development, how do you manage that balance so well?
I don't.
You do.
It varies wildly from story to story. I will say that. I guess sometimes it just comes down to needing to move plot along faster in some places than in others. So sometimes I want the dialogue to be extended because I want them to have more character development in that conversation. Sometimes I just want time to happen, and that's when I go more for the prose heavy side.
Well, you also have written at least some elements of stories with kind of like, oh, let's have a mystery about the identity of who this person is. Let's leave it to the reader to decide who it is or why. What appeals to you about writing that way?
I don't know. I've just always loved mysteries. I mean, I loved fantasy novels and sci-fi ever since I was a kid, and those tend to have a lot of mystery in them. So I think it's just my love of mystery just kind of squeaks into all my writing.
Any absolute necessities as writing tools for you?
My spreadsheet to track my progress.
Spreadsheet. Tell us more.
Well, shout out to Taylor, aka Down in Flames now, not Shadow Rose anymore. Down in Flames. So
Scary. Oh, the
ooh,
changes.
so she sent me her spreadsheet that she did for Nano last year, and I loved it, and I shamelessly copied it. And I've also been doing it now for May, and it's helped me like actually continue writing every day versus back in like March, I was just kind of writing when I could, and I felt very disconnected from my stories because I wouldn't touch them for like a week. So having my tracker is quite helpful. It makes me stay focused on what I'm doing.
All right. Taylor, in my own house, perilous move on the deadline of your challenge, but where's my spreadsheet? Just gonna say it. Um, in any event, I think we've got one more question from the chat, which is referencing. You mentioned you've written plenty of Draco before. What is it about Draco that you like a lot?
Well,
And
I've
that's from
written
Lexi.
a lot in the terms of mostly in the context of Hermione, because that's hashtag OTP. But I also wrote him recently for the great collab in March with Pix from your house, Kevin. And
I know Pix. We've met IRL.
ooh. So Draco's just a character to me that there was so much more that he could have had in canon that JK didn't give him, in terms of like a character arc. So I just like to reimagine an arc for him in many different ways. So I think that's why I like him a lot.
Alrighty, well, it looks like those are the questions from our chat. I don't have any other stupid questions of my own to throw at you. Thank you so much for being a part of Fic Night again, the third time. Everybody watching, the story is A Letter is Like Immortality by MadiMalfoy, posted on the HPFT archives at hpfanfictalk.com/archive. You can look at this story and all of the other, I think definitely at this point we're at thousands of stories on the archive by all of our other members and authors. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being with us. And go check out A Letters Like Immortality by MadiMalfoy.